What's the MCAT? Don't sign up and take the actual MCAT, just take a practice exam. There are a whole lot of third-party companies that have practice exams available. The AAMC also has a free practice exam available. This practice test is going to help you figure out what you need to study, what you don't know, and even just how the MCAT is structured. It's also going to give you an understanding of how long 7.5 hours is. After taking your practice exam, review your results. There are foundational concepts that the AAMC has created that are all of the concepts that will be tested on the MCAT. These concepts are not as straightforward as any of your prerequisite courses would be. So for example, it's not just going to talk about enzymes as it relates to biochemistry. It's going to talk about enzyme structure and function as it relates to biochemistry, so organic chemistry, general chemistry, biology, and whatever other things they want to pull in. So you have to have an understanding of all of those different prereqs in order to be able to answer one question about an enzyme. This is where students start to shut down because they start to recognize, like, I actually have a lot more work than I need to do. That's not a bad thing. So if there's any information you feel like you don't fully understand yet, this is the time to learn that information, because when you go to medical school, it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks, and anything that you don't know, you won't have time to review. So look through the foundational concepts and see which concepts don't even look familiar to you. Circle those, start there. The goal is to be able to at least have a basis where things look familiar. You do not need to know everything about everything in order to do well in the MCAT. You're never going to be able to know everything that could be tested on the MCAT, because science is going to change the day you take your test. Recognizing that you're not going to know everything, the big goal here is to get to a space where your mind is right before you start. You've already done the work to assess the friends that you're going to have to get rid of, the boundaries you're going to have to create around the relationships that you do have, and the person that you're going to have to become. If you think that you can passively get through the MCAT, you're not going to be as successful as you could be otherwise, because you're not putting all of your energy and effort into it. Everyone's effort is going to be different. You need to figure out what you need to do. This isn't about nobody else. What do you need to do? Now it's time to actually start the content. Limit your time reviewing your content, focusing on the things that you actually need to review. If it's something that you don't feel fully confident with, but you know you at least have the material down, do not keep wasting time trying to learn one more little detail. Move on. The majority of the time you spend preparing for the MCAT should be spent answering and reviewing questions, not reviewing the content. While you're reviewing content, make summaries. If this is daily, if this is weekly, however often you need to create a summary for it to stick. The purpose of creating these summaries is to be able to rely on your own notes, to build your own confidence that you know what you're doing, that you're able to take effective notes, and that your notes are actually helpful for you remembering things in the future. Also, ask yourself, how is this relevant to the human body? You're taking the MCAT to become a physician. So any material that is going to be tested on the MCAT is seeing if you are prepared to train to be a physician. All of the science concepts that you're going to be reviewing have some relevance to the human body. Figure out what it is. Once you think you finished the content phase, take another practice exam. Do you feel different? Do you see progress was made? Are you able to see different things in the questions? Do you actually feel like you have a better understanding of the material now? Your score might not change at all. This is just time for you to be focusing on whether or not you're making any progress. If you recognize after taking the practice exam that you have some details that are missing from your summaries, finish that. Make sure your summaries are clear and concise. There will be time for you to add to your summaries while you're going through questions, but the majority of the time while you're doing questions should be spent reviewing the questions and assessing your strategy. Now that you've fully finished the content phase, it's time to move on to the questions. When you're doing your practice questions, the most important thing to do is create an error log. The error log will help you track all of the questions that you're getting wrong, as well as help you understand why you're getting the questions wrong. It's important not to just write down what I got wrong, what the correct answer was, but to also explain where you went wrong in your thinking. A lot of the answer explanations are not really good. So it's up to you to come up with your own explanations as to why you got something incorrect. If you have an understanding of, oh, I missed this word, oh, I missed this concept, when you see it written down 75 times over the course of you doing these practice questions, you're going to commit to not continuing to make that mistake and at least changing that. And that is the strategy that you end up developing. Your individualized strategy is going to be based upon your individualized mistakes. If you don't make any mistakes, you ain't going to develop a strategy. And if you think you don't make mistakes, you ain't going to do well in the MCAT because nobody gets a 528 on the MCAT. If you're trying to figure out what would be the best investment of your money for MCAT preparation, I would recommend getting some kind of an MCAT tutor, especially if they're trying to get above 60th percentile into the really competitive scores. Next up, get your weight up. The MCAT is 7.5 hours. That's not short. If you're trying to get a competitive score, don't think you can put in lackadaisical effort. You have to build up your stamina. At least 2 weeks before your exam, you should be studying minimally 7.5 hour days. There's no way your body is going to know what it's like to be on for 7.5 hours if you've never done it before. Make sure that that studying starts at the exact same time when you are supposed to start your actual MCAT. I would recommend not just deciding I'm going to crank out studying for 9 hours. Try to break that up into chunks, similar to something called the Pomodoro method. I would recommend having those chunks where you're on be around 95 minutes or longer, and the time that you're off being around 5 minutes. You're going to get a lot more used to how the MCAT is going to be structured if you're holding yourself to these very specific timelines. The last thing to know is take the day off before your exam. If you do not allow yourself space to rest, you're not going to be able to perform when you have to perform. And lastly, kill that shit. 3 things to remember. There's not a specific timeline. Your timeline is going to be different than anybody else's timeline because your experience in the classes you took is different from everybody else's. Do not compare your timeline to what anybody else is doing. There are a lot of recommended courses by the AAMC that are not required to go to medical school, but are absolutely tested on the MCAT. Be aware there might be some actual coursework that you need to go learn for the first time. That will also extend the amount of time that you're preparing for the MCAT. And lastly, comparing to other people is only going to delay your own success. Put your blinders on and get to focus.